With just 24 days until Election Day, Vice President Harris is set to release a report on her medical history today. A senior Harris aide says the report will show she's physically and mentally fit to serve as president. And by making this public, the Harris team hopes that it underscores Donald Trump's lack of transparency, let's just say, when it comes to his health. On the campaign trail, Trump rambles through speeches, as the New York Times puts it, quote, Trump has seemed confused, forgetful, incoherent, or even just disconnected from reality lately. And frankly, Donald Trump's rallies are also just full of lies and racist fear-mongering. In these final weeks of the campaign, the contrast could not be more clear.
Part of what we know has been happening in the last several years in our country is there's some powerful forces that are trying to divide us as Americans, would have us and cheer us on if we point fingers at one another.
America is known all throughout the world as occupied America. They call it occupied. We're being occupied by a criminal force. What they're doing to our country, they're destroying, they are ruining our country. We are being led by stupid people.
Well, we obviously need a professor in the house. So joining us is professor at Princeton University, Eddie Glaude Jr., and Juanita Tolliver is also here. Her new book, A More Perfect Party, The Night Shirley Chisholm and Diane Carroll Reshaped Politics, comes out in January, and I cannot wait. Both are MSNBC political analysts.
Good
Who
morning.
Want to take this, Michael?
So Eddie, I'm gonna go to, because Simone was right. We need some professorial understanding here. Kamala Harris is releasing her health records today. Every presidential candidate has, since presidential candidates have been releasing their records. Donald Trump has yet, and all the time that we have known of him and seen him, has refused to do so. He's had doctors sort of put together a piece of paper with a whole lot of BS on it about the man weighing 215 pounds, looking like Wally the Walrus. But okay, we'll set that aside. The New York Times, though, reports if he wins, Trump could enter the Oval Office with an array of potentially worrisome issues, medical experts say. Cardiac risk factors, possible after effects from the July assassination attempt, and the cognitive decline that naturally comes with an age, among other things. The man is old as dirt. He's the oldest man to ever run for president, and yet the country doesn't seem to care that he doesn't release his health records, that we have no idea what's going on in that little brain of his. Maybe he had brain worms like Robert F. Kennedy Jr. We don't know. How does he get away with this? And why is the country so accepting that Donald Trump can just say, I'm not going to tell you about my health, but the press and others seemingly demand that everybody else put out theirs?
First of all, it's such a wonderful time to be here on the weekend, Michael, and to see you guys. But it's not. You don't require a professor to try to make clear or make plain what's going on. Donald Trump has been given a pass in so many ways. He represents not America as such, but a large slice of America. And there's this sense that the spoiled man can do whatever he wants because there's the fear that you will activate the anger of his base. And it seems to me that we've been tiptoeing around Donald Trump. That is not only the press, but also Democrats and particularly mainstream Republicans tiptoeing around Donald Trump for fear that he would activate the ugliness of his base and endanger the country. And I think that particular approach has come back to bite us in the behind.
It's interesting. I'm looking, Juanita, through this medical healthcare statement has now been released by the vice president's campaign. She sounds a lot like yours truly, where she has myopia. She needs corrective lenses in order to see. She's got some what seem to be allergies. She takes Allegra, and she has a family history of maternal history of colon cancer. But otherwise, she herself in incredibly good health, signed off by a doctor. Meanwhile, you have Donald Trump talking about cylinders. Can we pull up the sound for Juanita of the former president at the Detroit Economic Club?
This isn't like Elon with his rocket ships that land within 12 inches on the moon where they wanted to land. Or he gets the engines back. That was the first I realized. I said, who the hell did that? I saw engines about 3-4 years ago. These things were coming, cylinders, no wings, no nothing. And they're coming down very slowly, landing on a raft in the middle of the ocean someplace with a circle. Boom. Reminded me of the Biden circles that he used to have, right? He'd have 8 circles and he couldn't fill them up. But then I heard he beat us with the popular vote. I don't know. I don't know.
It's not funny, Juanita, right? Because that is the person who currently is vying to once again sit behind the Resolute desk. We don't know anything about his health.
He not only wants to sit behind the Resolute desk, he also wants access to the nuclear codes. And I think this is the last thing he wants to be talking about in the last 3 weeks leading up to the election, because not only does it live up to what Vice President Harris has been saying, just watch his rallies to see the rambling and the nonsense, but it also shines a light on his vice presidential pick. He is the oldest man to seek the presidency. And the reality is what that means with this lack of a health report and the lack of transparency, the nation has to look at J.D. Vance like, oh, you could actually get access to the Oval Office. You could actually be the person who steps in for Trump should anything happen to him. And the important reality is that politically, this hurts Donald Trump. And I think that's something that the vice president and her campaign are going to be emphasizing over the next few weeks, extending from their, again, watch his rallies, watch the nonsense for yourself, but another opportunity to put Donald Trump on defense in these last few weeks.
Can we read more from the health report? Because we now have a copy in front of us as well. And I should note that this is what usually happens, right? Like every candidate, presidential candidate, we actually usually would have seen the first reports like this in a primary among presidential candidates, and then sooner than this in a general election. The memo was prepared by the communications director for the vice president, and it is from her physician, particularly the physician from the president. This is what it reads. It says, Vice President Harris is up to date on all preventative care recommendations, including colonoscopy, annual mammograms. She's taking vitamin D3 supplementation for skeletal health, aren't we all? And she is at low risk for cardiovascular disease. There's a word before that that I cannot pronounce. She maintains a healthy, active lifestyle despite her busy schedule, including vigorous daily aerobic exercise and core strength training. She eats a very healthy diet. She does not use tobacco products and drinks only occasionally and in moderation. Routine immunizations are all up to date. Do we think we're going to see one of these from Donald Trump? One, Eddie, and then two, this is one of the campaign is attempting to force a conversation about Donald Trump's age and his health. I'm wondering, do folks think that is in this, less than a little over 2.5, 3 weeks left in Election Day? Is that the ground that they would like to be on?
So first of all, Simone, he's not going to submit his medical report. Mm-hmm. And second, it doesn't matter. His support isn't contingent upon his healthiness. His support isn't contingent upon his reasonableness. His support is contingent upon him being an avatar for grievance and hatred. Right? So part of what we have to understand, I understand that this might be, releasing the vice president's medical reports might be important for a few undecided voters, for that middle that they're trying to get. But in terms of the overall process, the political process at this stage of the game, this doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. Donald Trump is out there running his mouth, not making any sense, weaving, bobbing, doing whatever he's doing, and folk will continue to support him, and he will continue to stoke all of the ugliness that we are experiencing as of late. So I think this is important for the middle, for those undecideds, perhaps, but it's not going to have any impact on Donald Trump's campaign.
So Juanita, let's put the health reports in a little bucket that it'll go in that most people will ignore relative to Donald Trump, and there will be some folks who will nitpick what Simone just read and go, well, she's got
drinking wine.
She's drinking wine and she's taking D3. Oh my God, there's something wrong with her. 24 days out. Mm-hmm. Health reports are coming out. We've got more than enough evidence of Donald Trump's incapacity to put together a coherent statement, his incapacity to lay out a plan or a vision for the country beyond some dystopian landscape that is nothing more than a hellscape, as you noted, of grievance. Where does the campaign go in these last 24 days? We'll get into conversations a little bit about what's happening with some of the voters out there who still are undecided. I'm talking to y'all. I got something for you. So just, whoo, baby, 24 days out and you still don't know after 9 years of this ish? Anyway, where do you think this goes for the campaign, for her campaign? She's doing all the right things and is still tied with this former president.
You can say it. You can say it. Okay.
With this former president.
I feel like it's all about mobilization, and I emphasize that understanding that early voting started weeks ago, Michael.
Right.
People are casting their ballots in real time, and Election Day is, in fact, the last day to vote. And so I think focusing on that, focusing on the grassroots, and I'm a girl who came up in field operations. That's where you win. And so I fully expect this national conversation to be whatever it's going to be. The headlines can ask the questions about what Trump is hiding by not releasing his report. But the reality is, how many voters are calling their friends and family after they've cast their early vote? How many volunteer shifts are you picking up? How many people are you deploying in North Carolina, Georgia, Pennsylvania, Arizona? That's where the attention should honestly be. And we're seeing that pick up with her deployment of surrogates across the country. And so I think that is the only thing that matters to everyday people and the campaign staff. Remember, Vice President Harris, she is leading this effort, but she is not the sole person running this race. She has hundreds of thousands of staff on the ground, and not hundreds of thousands of staff, but volunteers and staffers working across the country. And Democrats have been intentional about the infrastructure they've been investing in long term to try to realize a positive outcome in this election.
Okay, so you've helped me avoid having to get in trouble with Simone and Alicia this morning.
No curse words.
Help, Alicia, help.
Joining me now, Michigan Lieutenant Governor Garland Gilchrist. It's nice to see you again. Welcome back, Lieutenant Governor. Give me a sense of the mood in Michigan, 24 days out from the election for the Harris team there.
People are really fired up in Michigan, Alex, whether it's in the city of Detroit, where I'm from and live, to the Upper Peninsula of Michigan, where I've been this weekend. Our volunteer energy is through the roof, and people are ready to have conversations about what's at stake in this election. And frankly, we're insulted that every time Donald Trump or J.D. Vance come to Michigan, they lie to our people, they insult people. Trump insulted my city of Detroit, where I'm from, where I was raised, where people saw power and potential in a young Black man like me and helped me to be my best self. And Kamala Harris also sees that potential in the way that Donald Trump clearly does not, as he only seeks to insult us and degrade us.
Yeah, I'm going to give viewers a sense of those insults in just a second. But the recent polling shows Kamala Harris up slightly in Michigan. What does the vice president need to do to close the deal in your state?
Well, we knew that Michigan was going to be close coming into this election, and the voluntary energy since she came to the top of our ticket has been palpable. And she needs to be here more. She's been here almost every week, either her or J.D. Vance. And I think that's going to continue through Election Day, and we appreciate that. She's firing voters up. She did so in Flint, Michigan, just a couple of weeks ago, for example. And so I think her presence, but also talking about that she sees the potential of economic opportunity and prosperity, that she believes in our auto industry. My mother's a General Motors retiree. GM put food on my table. The auto industry has changed lives in our state. And the fact that she sees a vision for it, she will commit to keeping investments that have already been committed to in the state of Michigan for new auto plants. Like, she's going to keep that and make sure that we have the chance to continue to grow and continue to define that sector. Like Donald Trump and J.D. Vance, they talked explicitly about the fact they're going to renege on the government's promises to the people of Michigan. That's just really terrible.
Okay. And I know you meant to say Governor Walz has been there, because he has been there an awful lot. But President Obama campaigned for Kamala Harris Thursday in Pennsylvania, and he spoke directly to Black men about his perceived lack of enthusiasm from them about the campaign. Let's listen to what he said.
You're coming up with all kinds of reasons and excuses. I've got a problem with that, because part of it makes me think, and I'm speaking to men directly now, part of it makes me think that, well, you just aren't feeling the idea of having a woman as president.
So a new New York Times poll shows more and more black voters are voting for Trump. His support could potentially double this year compared to 2016. So is what we just heard the right message? Is Barack Obama the right messenger to attract black male voters, or might it strike some as a bit scolding?
Well, let's take a step back. The way to get black men engaged in anything from being entrepreneurs like I was in my 20s to getting them to vote for Kamala Harris and Tim Walz, it's to show that you care about them and that you believe in their power, that you believe that their choices matter, that you believe that they can impact things for the better. And by showing people and encouraging them to vote, I think that's the right way to go. And I've seen that from the Harris-Walz campaign, and I've seen that from Kamala Harris as vice president. You know, I talked about me being an entrepreneur. Well, her and I and their administration worked on a program that used state small business credit dollars from the federal government to create the Michigan Economic Opportunity Fund that we launched last year, a $10 million fund specifically to benefit black entrepreneurs and other disadvantaged entrepreneurs who couldn't get money from banks but can get money from the government to launch their ideas. That's the kind of message about economic opportunity, potential, and ambition. That's what has motivated the black men in the conversations that I have all across Michigan about why they're ready to vote and why they're going to vote for Kamala Harris.
And in fact, she's going to be in Michigan on Tuesday, continuing her media blitz during a radio town hall. It'll be hosted by nationally syndicated radio host Charlamagne Tha God. It is yet another effort to reach black men across battleground states. Could Charlamagne, in a way, be a better voice to reach black male voters overall?
I mean, Charlamagne is an incredibly trusted voice in our community because he's honest, he's real, he's genuine. And black folks listen to him because we know that he cares about black voters today, and he cares about our future. He cares about our mental health. And, Kamala Harris does as well. So I'm excited that he's going to be, hosting this conversation in Detroit. And I think those conversations are going to rhyme with the conversation that I have with black voters across the state of Michigan, that they want someone who's going to protect their health care, because we have a lot of family members who are living with diabetes that can't afford their insulin. Well, Kamala Harris is going to help make that insulin get $35 for everybody. They're going to talk about, again, black entrepreneurship as the way to create wealth so that we can increase the level of black business ownership in a city like Detroit, the city with one of the highest black populations in the country. And so this conversation is important. I'm excited to welcome both of them to Michigan to have it, and it's going to make a difference.
Okay, Michigan Lieutenant Governor Garlin Gilchrist. Thanks for the chat. Good to see you again. Thank you. Back with me now, more friends, Amisha Cross and Brendan Buck. So, Amisha, on Tuesday, Kamala Harris is going to sit down with Charlamagne Tha God on his very popular Breakfast Club radio show. A new New York Times poll confirms other recent surveys that Harris has been losing support among black voters, especially among young men. Let's take a listen to some of former President Obama's pretty stern words at those voters at a Pittsburgh campaign office on Thursday. Here's that.
And you're thinking about sitting down, and you're coming up with all kinds of reasons and excuses. I've got a problem with that, because part of it makes me think, and I'm speaking to men directly now, part of it makes me think that, well, you just aren't feeling the idea of having a woman as president. And you're coming up with other alternatives and other reasons for that.
Do you think on-the-fence voters will respond to these pretty blunt, direct words? I mean, what else should Harris be doing to appeal to young black men?
No, I don't think that is the message that is going to move young black men or black men broadly. What we do know is that black men, in terms of the exit polls that we've seen in election after election, they vote a good 3 to 4 percentage points variance from black women. Black people holistically are the largest body of support for the Democratic Party and have been for some time. So I do think that a lot of this ire is misplaced. It started online and was led by some right wingers, and I think that it has kind of exploded. Are there people who are not necessarily excited about this election cycle? obviously. And many of those are people who are, still dealing with the effects of the COVID-19 pandemic in terms of their personal economy. These are individuals who, and Black men are a big part of this, who feel as though they have not seen sizable gains in healthcare. They have not seen sizable gains in housing support. They have not seen sizable gains in things like small business ownership. They want to have a slice of the American pie, an American pie that was literally designed to leave them out. Those people have a very strong, I think, appeal towards the Democratic Party to ask for more. And they've been doing that for a while now. Those voices shouldn't be quelled. But I think that when it comes to turnout, the idea of turnout is not by insulting people. The idea of getting people out is more so showing them how the policies you're pushing for, that opportunity economy, is open to Black men, what it actually looks like for them on a daily basis. That is more the argument that needs to be had here than anything else.
And Brendan, Donald Trump has been appearing almost exclusively on shows directed squarely at young male audiences. And these interviews mostly amount to Trump partaking in kind of fraternity house or locker room talk with young right-wing influencers and presenting himself as the ultimate alpha male bro type. Is avoiding traditional media helping Trump? I mean, what do you make of him doubling down on support from young men to get him to the White House?
Yeah, I think it's less avoiding traditional media and it's more playing to his strengths. I mean, they look at polls and they see that young white men really like Donald Trump, and they're going to try to run up the score there. Donald Trump was never made to appeal to the middle. He was never made to try to win over those Nikki Haley voters with his moderation. That's just not who he is. And frankly, I don't think it's that bad a call to say we're not going to try to make Donald Trump somebody that he isn't. But I mean, to bring this all together, Harris is not doing as well with Black men. She's just not doing as well with men in general. And I think what was so remarkable about what Barack Obama did there, it wasn't necessarily a message to win them over. It was forcing this conversation, forcing Democrats to recognize that they have a big problem with men. And I'll be honest, I think some of the campaign, or whether it's allied groups, their messaging to men, I think, is just really missing the mark. Tim Walz going off and shooting some peasants, that's fine and all. But their ads are like, look, if you're man enough, you can support a woman's right to choose. It's sort of like force-feeding that you're a progressive. I think what Barack Obama did on stage at an event recently is much more effective. It's pointing out that Donald Trump is not the strong man you think he is. We've seen that men like strength as a characteristic. And Obama has made the point he's not a strong man. He complains constantly. He's probably the most insecure person in America, and trying to take him down a notch rather than saying strong men support the progressive agenda. I hope that they can figure out pretty soon that what they've been doing with men is not working.
We will see, Amisha and Brendan. I'll see you guys again soon. Thank you. It is the one state that could give us an early.
Joining me now, Congresswoman Debbie Dingell, Democrat of Michigan. Thank you for joining us tonight, Congresswoman. We're starting off with the president and the presidential race, I should say, in Michigan, where the latest poll, Quinnipiac poll, shows Trump ahead of Vice President Harris in the Great Lakes state, with Trump at 50% to Harris at 47%, which we note is still within the margin of error. Both candidates badly want to win Michigan. Congresswoman, Trump was in Detroit this week. More on that in a second, but the vice president will be there next week for an interview. What's the state of play looking like to you in your home state just 24 days before Election Day?
Reverend Sharpton, first of all, it's always good to be with you. And I'm just going to be very honest with you. I don't believe either candidate has won this state yet. I think it's going to be razor thin. I think it's going to come down to who votes. And I think either candidate can win this race right now. And it, quite frankly, is worrying me.
Now, staying with Michigan, Congresswoman, your largest city, Detroit, is in the midst of a hard-fought economic comeback. And this week, Donald Trump warned that the entire country would resemble Detroit if the vice president wins in November. Of course, he said this while campaigning in Detroit, which offended many Michigan Democrats, including the city's mayor, Mike Duggan, who credited Detroit's turnaround to Trump's replacement by President Biden and Vice President Harris. As he tries to win your state, what are your thoughts about Trump's habit of insulting communities like Detroit with large black populations, even when he needs their votes?
So, Reverend, I was actually there because I'm on the board of the group that he spoke to, and they're a nonpartisan group. They try to have bipartisan support. It was difficult, but because many of them asked me to go, I went. And in that room, I'm going to tell you, it looked like it was very spontaneous to me, just the way that he insulted Milwaukee right before the Republican convention. And it angered a lot of people, including myself. He needs to see Detroit, see how it has come back, the grit that it has. We have had so many successful events, including the NFL draft, and people were stunned at how great it was. Young people have moved downtown. We've just opened the train station. New people are moving in there to work. Detroiters, I was born in Detroit. When people ask me where I'm from, I still say Detroit. I think you heard the real Donald Trump on Thursday, and I think he made a serious mistake. He insulted a lot of us.
Well, and you have all the sporting events coming to Detroit and in parts of the city that are trying to rebuild. You know, our head National Action Network, Reverend Charles Williams II, doing a great job there. It's just totally, in my opinion, targeted. But let me go to here. Kamala Harris has been able to improve Democrats' standing with black voters since she entered the race. But new polling from the New York Times shows her struggling to reach the same level of black voter support President Biden did 4 years ago, and that could hurt her in swing states like Michigan. Nearly 8 in 10 black likely voters say they're voting for Harris, according to the poll, but about 15% say they're voting for Trump, a 6-point increase from 2020, and that includes 1 in 5 black men. And it's that deficit that had former President Barack Obama specifically admonishing black men to support the vice president this week. But I wonder, some are saying that if he's chastising a group that has overwhelmingly supported Democrats for decades, if it could backfire. Some critics of Obama's message have suggested. I don't agree with it. I think that he should challenge them, but there have been others that differ. What are your thoughts?
So I want to say something. I think it's on all Democrats. I've talked to a lot of young black men. I try to be with, I try to meet with people on a regular basis. And actually, Jim Clyburn was here last weekend and met with my Ministers Alliance from IFSI in Ann Arbor. And I quite frankly was stunned at the number of young men who expressed their concern. And quite frankly, their message to Democrats was, you take us for granted. Donald Trump talks to us directly. And Jim Clyburn talked about it in another meeting, how someone had said Donald Trump sent them an economic stimulus check. But then Jim Clyburn went on to give them the nitty-gritty of what the Biden-Harris administration really had done for them. So again, we've got to do a better job of communicating. And one of my young ministers said, this is it. We don't see a change in policy or see people talking to policy. And I said, can I come to your church? And I asked to go to his church after the election, so they know that they're seeing us after the election. And he said, come before and come after. So I think it's a message to all Democrats. And it's the same. In 2016, I told you Democrats weren't talking about trade. And that was one of the reasons Donald Trump was doing better. We need, all of us as Democrats need to hear what's being said. Don't take them for granted. Hear their fears, hear their issues, talk to them, and make sure they feel included.
And I agree. And come after the election, after you get the votes, but also give the record. Black unemployment down under Harris, under Biden-Harris, black-white wealth gap. And look at Trump. His court killed affirmative action, killed student debt loan, killed voting rights. I mean, that's not chastising people. That's giving the record. I think that's a bum rap on President Obama. But before you go, I want to get to the breaking news tonight that physicians have deemed Vice President Harris to be in excellent health after the White House released her medical records this weekend. Trump said he would release his medical records 2 months ago. That hasn't happened. But in response, his campaign referred to a vague letter posted to his Truth Social account in November from Trump's self-described personal physician, along with reports from Texas Congressman Dr. Ronnie Jackson, who treated Trump after his July assassination attempt, all of which say that the former president is in excellent health, but without specifics for the oldest major party candidate in our history. Should he have to release his records now, Congresswoman? And should this be a bigger campaign issue given his age? Since they made an age issue out of Joe Biden, where's all of the hollering and screaming about the oldest candidate in U.S. history that won't release specific health records?
Reverend Sharpton, that's exactly what I was going to say. They were the ones that were demanding that they see more health records on Joe Biden, what was being hidden, accusing him of having ill health. Look, if you're going to run for president, you're going to be transparent. You've got to be transparent about everything. And we do need to see his health records. People, doctors, I'm not a doctor, but doctors I know and respect and have national prominence have raised questions. I think it's legitimate to ask both candidates to release their records, and both candidates should be releasing their records.
All right. Thank you, Congresswoman Debbie Dingell of Michigan.
The recent Supreme Court immunity decision has reignited questions about the president's pardon power, a power that lacks any clear restraints and is ripe for abuse. My next guest's new book investigates the executive power and details how accountability is needed in order to help preserve our democracy. She writes, quote, "The Trump administration showed us that in the wrong hands, the president's pardon power is poised to become a devastatingly sinister tool of corruption and abuse. It's time for the pardon power to shrink, possibly into obscurity. Democracy will no doubt be better for it." Joining me now is Kim Whaley, professor of law at the University of Baltimore and the author of Pardon Power, How the Pardon System Works and Why. Kim, it's an honor to have you on the show. I'm so excited about your book, and I can't wait for everybody to get their hands on it to read it. Let's start with the foundational how, though. Let's start with that basic premise. How can a president pardon him or herself?
Well, the how is really leads to the question of if they were to do that, what's the pushback? And the issue in this moment, and it's just strengthened, I think, by the court's immunity decision, is whether there are any checks and balances on the presidency anymore. If the president were to pardon him or herself, who would stop them? Who would push back on them? That's really the question. Even a pardon for bribes, Katie, I think that's a possibility now that the Supreme Court has put the presidency above the law, even when it comes to committing crimes in office.
So, Kim, your book traces the origins of the pardon power going as far back as the English monarchy. That idea of investing that type of power in the executive branch stems from the English monarchy. We left the monarchy, right, Kim? We left the idea of having a king. And putting aside our opinions about that immunity decision, why did the framers include this executive action in the Constitution?
Well, they really seem to believe, at least Madison and Hamilton kind of carried the day on the idea that there needs to be some person of judgment that can exercise mercy if the criminal justice system goes awry. Remember, in common law England, there wasn't a constitution with constitutional rights for defendants. There wasn't even a criminal jury system until the 1200s, and appeals and all those measures of fairness. And that whole apparatus didn't exist at the federal level when the Constitution was ratified either. And frankly, I think the framers didn't foresee the kind of corruption we've seen lurking around the Oval Office. They sort of knew each other back in 1788 and trusted that whoever would have that kind of power would use it judiciously and fairly.
Until somebody named Donald Trump comes along and shows what he's capable of doing when he holds office of the presidency. You said here, there is a CBS poll that found that 62% of Americans, Kim, oppose pardons for the January 6th rioters who forced their way into the U.S. Capitol. And yet Donald Trump has still promised to pardon them if he comes back into office. He says he's going to pardon, quote, a large portion of them. You know, Kim, I wanted to ask you, we always talk about the pocket pardon, this idea of a president pardoning him or herself. But then there's also the ability for the president to pardon others. In this instance, what kind of long-term consequences could we see if we see somebody like Donald Trump back in the Oval pardoning the January 6th insurrectionists?
Well, it might have been that poll or another one over the summer where people were asked, why are you against pardons for the January 6th insurrectionists? And the answer was, and this was Republicans and Democrats, I'm paraphrasing, we don't want to encourage or greenlight political violence around elections. That if a president were to come in and say, you are patriots, I'm going to wash away all of the implications of the criminal justice system, the statutes that Congress enacted, the work of juries and judges, and let you walk on the theory that you're a patriot, that encourages that kind of behavior. But honestly, even more concern could be what Donald Trump will do for himself with a pardon. Now that the Supreme Court has said you can use official power to commit crimes, you're going to have to get people to execute your orders to commit crimes using official power. Those folks are not covered by immunity. But if Donald Trump were, as he did with some of those who engaged in the 2016 election interference, Roger Stone and Paul Manafort, if he were to pardon cronies or people in the White House, if they commit crimes on his behalf, Katie, we not only have a president above the law, but we have those around a president above the law if they're willing to commit crimes. So the pardon, in connection with that immunity decision, is extraordinarily dangerous in the wrong hands.
So I have to ask, is there an expiration date on a pocket pardon? Let's just say hypothetically Donald Trump pardoned himself. The fact that he hasn't used that pardon at this point in time, signifies to me or militates to the fact that maybe he didn't do that. But is there an expiration date on a presidential pardon in any way?
No, I mean, the pardon power is very vague. So something like that would have to be established either through precedent or it'd have to be established through a Supreme Court ruling. I mean, I tend to agree with you. He dangled this pocket pardon while he was in office. He's smart about things like this. And if the Supreme Court at some point doesn't continue to give him win after win in these federal cases, it's not inconceivable that he will pull out a pocket pardon that he gave himself during his last term in office. And that would be yet another constitutional crisis triggered by Donald J. Trump.